Hello everybody, this is Conservation Conversation. Those of you who've been subscribed already know the deal. It's the place where I'll put in most of the rest of the conversation that I had with the contributor from last week. Not every single bit of the conversation, for instance the bits where I say and if you are subscribed, I want to say thank you. We're a very new YouTube channel and your views count towards a lot. This week I spoke to Professor Corrine Fowler, who works at the University of Leicester, and she is an academic in the field of colonialism and heritage. It was a brilliant conversation. There is a lot that was left out and it's all to come for you now. She wrote the book Our Island Stories, and that obviously is going to be the book of the week this week. I read it, I actually listened to the audiobook to tell you the truth, and she was really good at doing that. We spoke about the process of recording an audiobook, as well as some hot water that she got into with people like the Daily Mail. Once again, it's not really a conservation conversation this week, more of a colonialisation conversation. But I think you'll enjoy it nonetheless. The history of plants is really important, and as Corrine explains, quite integral to understanding Himalayan balsam. So, without further ado, let's go over to Moseley Bog. What inspired you to write about the countryside? Why did you want to focus on that?
Well, I think I had an interest in colonial history, then I had an interest in the countryside, just a personal interest in walking there and being in nature like so many of us. And so those two things came together. I wanted, because I realised that colonial history is such a sensitive history, that nature is a brilliant place for reflecting on what that history means and for having calm, unheated conversations about the evidence and what we know about colonial history and its connection to nature and to the countryside. So I wanted to write a book which was not just looking at the colonial history that's more familiar, so the port cities, the slave ports like Liverpool, the country houses and their connections to empire, which was something I worked on previously. But to think about how our fields, our woodlands, our mountains, villages and hamlets were reshaped by or affected by or touched by colonial history in ways that might not seem obvious. So for example...
They didn't to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you remember my enclosure walk, but the history of enclosure and that slow creeping privatisation of land is connected to colonial profiteering, so that fields were enclosed and, you know, by hedges and fences, and people were thrown off common land because of imperial wealth that was pouring into the country. And that it's not really a domestic history, it's something bigger than that. And I think it's the same when you look at a little plant or a medium-sized plant like Himalayan balsam, that it's reflecting human history, it's mirroring human history. There's a real mirror in the idea of enclosure and colonialism as a possession of land, peoples within the land. I was inspired to read the book of Trespass, whose author name I Nick Hayes.
Nick Hayes. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and a real education for me. Again, these are things that are right on our doorstep, and you came into some controversy, which is a matter of fact, and I'd hate to say is actually how I came across you while doing research. So if you're happy to, could you explain sort of how that came about? Because it then went on to influence your writing of the book.
Exactly.
So what happened?
Well, what happened was that I was seconded to the National Trust, which owns, as you know, probably some 300 country houses and country estates. And my job was to investigate the history of empire and to begin to address the colonial history of the properties in their care. So as part of that work, I produced a report about each country house and its connection to the British Empire, whether that was East India Company history, slavery history, or whatever colonial history it was. And we put that all together in one report, which was trying to highlight that history and show how unique and varied it is for each property. But then that became a major media story, and there was a lot of politicisation of the issue. So Jacob Rees-Mogg made a speech in Parliament about the report and how we were supposedly denigrating British history.
That's when you know you've ruffled some feathers.
Yeah, and there's a group called the Common Sense Group which used to go around shouting, virtually cut off her head with when it came to me, off with her head. But they were saying that this was a battle for Britain and that we were enemies of the people type thing in exposing this history, and that we were somehow politically motivated for doing it. I mean, for me, I think it's important that we know what colonial history is, and my idea remains that more knowledge is better than less knowledge.
Sure.
But I found myself in the middle of Britain's first modern culture war, and so there was a lot of media coverage of the issue, a lot of misleading commentary about it, and I think that many people who were offended by the report never actually read it. They just read what someone else who had a platform and was influential thought about it or wanted people to think about it.
So for some context, what year are we talking here?
This was 2020, so
2020. I mean, you couldn't get more right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And it's, I must ask, and I'm sure I can presume the answer, but was there any political motivation in you writing the report?
No.
Or
I mean,
not?
I'm connected to education, so I'm interested in creating resources for people which are based on evidence to help resource an informed public discussion about our colonial past, and that's part of my job as an educator.
Yeah.
So that was what I was really interested in researching and doing. But I think it was just a very convenient incident for people to perhaps weaponise for political gain, and that's why the discussion became very heated. And it's also why I felt that it was important to cool that conversation down.
Sure.
But I didn't either want to be intimidated by that or to stop my work, because it upsets people and it's sensitive and it's triggering for people. For some people, they see it as a threat.
You're generous to speak about people that way. I'm curious how it was for you. I mean, there were a lot of headlines, and actually thinking back, I think I was aware of the furore at the time without having specifically looked for it. Yeah. It sounds scary to me.
Yeah, it was, because every time there's a newspaper article which is read by thousands of people saying that you're somehow an enemy of the people, or, somehow, hello.
Don't mind us, sorry.
Lots of people come here, as you can see.
It's a beautiful place,
Yeah, lots of people come and have a nice walk here. But when you're being presented in such a distorted way, then people get angry, and then they contact you and they threaten you. They see you as somehow being a threat that has to be eliminated in some way. So it draws a lot of toxicity in your direction. So the answer to your question is, it was a complete nightmare, and I would never wish that on my worst enemy. Yeah.
No. Sorry, I slightly interrupted you. That was it sounds like it became personal, and
although it wasn't personal, because they didn't know me. So I that is always what I reminded myself, that they were just triggered by it because it was an apparent threat, and it might be a perceived threat to someone's worldview if you have to accommodate this unfamiliar knowledge in relation to country houses, places where you might want to switch off, walk your dog, spend time with your relatives. Then obviously that's going to be upsetting in some way. There's
an idea that, this is green and pleasant land, isn't it? Britain is countryside, and we're very proud of that. As a matter of fact, we're the most nature-depleted country in Europe. We don't protect it. We're speaking on the day when the government has slashed the environmental budget as well again. And without wishing to get too much into the weeds of that, there's a kind of feeling to me that we're much more happy to have our fingers in our ears when it comes to our countryside, our natural history, and certainly our colonial past. So how does it come about that people's misunderstanding of an academic study or with something with all the best interests at heart. How do you think that happens, or why do you think that happens?
The conclusion I've come to after actually answering my hate mail and having conversations with people is that there are some bad faith political actors who want to mobilise people against each other for their own political gain, and that by being offended by that, it makes people vulnerable to being manipulated and to feeling that there is a threat, or that their British identity is under threat, or their British history is being denigrated, all of these things that were said, when in fact all that's happening is that the messenger is coming with evidence, and then the messenger is getting shot at, and it's nothing to do with the messenger at all. So I think that it's a perceived threat, and I think that when I answered my hate mail and angry emails, it wasn't all hate mail, I did manage to connect with people over that history and to say, look, this is a shared history, here's the evidence, and just have a conversation with them about what had upset them and find out what had upset them.
Did you get much engagement back from
people? Yeah, I did. And
really?
People were really surprised after they'd sent an insulting email that I then responded in a kind way. You
broke the anonymity of the internet.
And I think exactly, and then they thought, oh, okay, this person seems quite nice. Whoops, now I feel bad. But I wasn't trying to make anyone feel bad.
Sure, no.
I was trying to connect with them in some way and to try to understand better what was going on in the wider conversations about empire beyond the bubble of higher education and so on. So.
Well, that's an interesting point. We're living in an era, I think it's fair to say, where the anti-academia voices are louder than certainly when I was growing up. It was still cool to look into that stuff when I was, and I'm very fortunate that when I was around teenage, 20 years old, it was still quite cool. Now, I think there is a vocal minority who are anti-academia. Do you notice that in your field? Do you think that's a noticeable effect?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, although it may seem obvious to most people that more knowledge is better than less knowledge, there is a bit of an informal campaign against universities and higher education, and a completely distorted depiction of universities as hotbeds of woke silliness that your children needn't go to and you needn't pay for them, and why don't you just get them on apprenticeships, etc., etc. But I think that this is really awful, because what universities have is that they are evidence-based. They are teaching skills like, reading between the lines, academic rigour, a logical discussion about things. Sorry, I'm
Absolutely.
being
me too, a little bit.
Fly is trying to
We're obviously very
stick
appealing.
its proboscis in my cheek, or whatever it is.
Mid-great point as well.
Mid-great point, yeah. This is. I'm under attack. So yeah.
Not again. I think Corinne's brilliant. We're just pausing for a little break, but we're not done yet. There's loads more chat to come. I wanted to interrupt just to talk to our subscribers out there. Some of you may have seen me sat in a lake last week. Some of you may have seen the video on Instagram and all of that sort of stuff where I dropped my microphone in the lake. I wanted to let you know that that is this microphone, and it is still working. It's a Zoom F2. We're not sponsored by Zoom. In fact, we're not sponsored by anybody. But if you are a sponsor out there who'd like to get involved with this channel and give us money to reach over 70 people, then please get in touch. Meanwhile, for lack of sponsor, we're going to cut to this advert.
This programme is brought to you by Genuinely Beneficial Product. This week.
Hedge.
Genuinely Beneficial Product.
Thanks, Genuinely Beneficial Product. Just to be clear, that's hedges as opposed to fences because they're more beneficial to wildlife. It's time for me to tell you the podcast of the week. And this week, that is Benjamin Zephaniah's History of Moseley Bog. Corinne recommended it while we were chatting and I gave it a listen. It's lovely, it's relaxing, and it's great to hear Benjamin's voice again. He goes around interviewing the grassroots conservationists who keep Moseley Bog in a beautiful state. If only someone would make a YouTube series about grassroots conservationists. I would recommend you listen to it via the Birmingham and Black Country Wildlife Trust's website. They've got an amazing web address, BBC Wildlife. Congratulations guys for that. And a sincere thank you for letting me film in Moseley Bog. You guys are great and I hope to talk to you more. Now, let's go back to Moseley Bog where Corinne and I are still talking about universities. I agree about universities. I mean, it's one of our most ancient institutions and something globally that we're renowned for.
Exactly.
People come for thousands of miles for education here. It's another one of those things, like our country houses and our green spaces, that we wear with pride when it's convenient and dismiss as soon as it's inconvenient. I think what upsets me about any sort of public backlash about academia or scientific study even sometimes is the misunderstanding that everybody involved had everyone's best interests at heart. And, you know, without wanting to tar everyone the same brush or be stereotypical, academics are not out to get you, I wouldn't think. They want the truth. They want the truth. Why is this particular truth, our colonial history? I say our, I'm sorry, I have British ancestors, I wonder if you do too. Yeah, our colonial history. Why is that prickly for people?
I think our colonial past is a really sensitive topic because there is a tradition of celebrating empire which is not in the too distant past. So many people who grew up in this country, especially the older generation, grew up celebrating Empire Day.
Yep.
And then there was a generation, I think mine, which didn't really learn much about colonial history at all, not even the basics. You know, what was the Royal African Company, what was the East India Company, what was the slavery system, how did it operate? And so that gap in knowledge has created a bit of a shock element when people talk, you know, try to bring that history into focus nowadays. So when you combine something revered and something which is a cause of pride like country houses, and then you put it next to colonial history and you show how colonial profits have everything to do with country houses, I think it's really difficult to compute. And so it just gives you this is what it gives a sense of threat, that this is false or made up, or that someone's trying to be deliberately provocative. But actually at the time those connections to empire would have been obvious to people, but it's since been forgotten, both deliberately and by accident.
Something I did want to ask is that I think it's fair to ask, what do you think if there were any, the criticisms of, let's say, to begin with, the report that you wrote, what were there any legitimate criticisms, or really what I'm interested in is, what did people think the end goal of you writing this was? If it was silly woke nonsense, what could the goal possibly be? It's not like you're trying to hurt anyone or you know.
No, I think well, the main accusation was that it was unpatriotic, but you know, my answer would be, since when has it been unpatriotic to tell the truth?
Sure.
And especially when it's completely based on demonstrable evidence. But, I think one accusation was that you shouldn't associate slavery with colonialism, and those are two separate things. But my answer to that would be that in order to plant sugar and have sugar plantations, cotton plantations and so on, you had to have a colony, and all of those Caribbean islands and the plantations of tobacco and so on and cotton in the Americas were in colonies. So colonisation is part of the process of the slavery system as well. So the other answer to that would be that East India Company history and colonial history generally and slavery history, they were all happening concurrently. Right. So to separate them out is a little artificial, because when you look at for example, country house history, sometimes within the same generation or within the same historical figure who lived in a country house, or between generations, you had different kinds of colonial history taking place, and so you were just following the history of the house and looking to where the history led you, and that was why the report was written in the way it was. I think the real fear behind that was that there is a way of looking at history through a lens of guilt and shame that says slavery was bad and colonisation of places like India was good. and you know, we left the railways and all that kind of stuff. This way of looking at history is very reductionist and not really very helpful at all, because it's not really trying to understand what the history was. It's trying to make moral judgments about one type of colonialism as against another. So I completely reject that being the main criticism of the report. Another criticism that was given, which was really frustrating, and I think a kind of smear campaign to try and discredit the report in the first place, was that one journalist wrote it was littered with errors. But nobody ever provided any evidence to suggest it was littered with errors, but then that was repeated without checking across all the newspapers. So my reputation kind of flashed before my eyes. But actually, the only one criticism that was offered in terms of accuracy was something about Curzon and Kedleston Hall, which was actually on a website, not on my report. So I think it was really frustrating, because that seemed to be a really malicious attempt to discredit the report, because to this day no one has ever pointed out an error. All it was just an audit of peer-reviewed research that had been written and published already in journals and books and so on about National Trust houses, and putting it all in one place. So it wasn't even new research.
I think, you know, if in bad faith you had put factual inaccuracies or manipulation of truths, then definitely that's a problem. But I can only imagine that your work is, or that a report like that especially, is held to an incredibly high standard. Well, I mean, I want to come on to the positives. Some positives came out of it, and it certainly shows in our island stories. So is that, from what I understand, you took some of that backlash and put that energy into the book?
Absolutely, because I think that what it did was it kind of deepened my resolve to explore the subject more, because I realised by writing that report quite how fertile a subject it is, and how our natural landscapes are so have so much to do with colonial history. And so I think that it also affected the way I wrote about that history, because the idea was to have a conversation with somebody else about that history, not shouting much, in a calm environment, and to think about what that history means at a human level. So it's not just a collection of facts, but it's something which is really resonant for somebody personally who is living in Britain today, like so many others, has ancestral connections to empire. And also I'm very conscious that I am also, you know, connected to the more brutal side of colonial history, because my ancestors were slave owners and East India Company personnel and officials. So it's something which is very close to all of us, and I think that it's best to look at it in a kind of calm and reflective and respectful way.
What were your feelings on discovering that about your ancestry?
I thought it was strange, because I was in the middle of writing a book which brought East India Company history together with slavery history. And then I found out in the middle of writing that book that is the story of my family, effectively. So
Did you panic?
It kind of made the hair stand up on the back of my neck when and then later, after having written the National Trust report, I then found out that one of my East India Company French relatives was captured by one of the owners of one of the National Trust houses on my report. So I was involved in that as well.
Blimey, both sides.
So I just thought, okay, that's no. It's just a little bit weird.
It must have been in your bones. known she wanted to do it.
Yeah, I think maybe it's some kind of weird intergenerational push to find the truth. I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. You were speaking about calmness and calm conversations. I listened to the audiobook that you recorded, and I loved the almost sort of podcasty style sections at the beginning of each chapter. Where you speak with, or not every chapter I don't think, but most chapters where you speak to the person you were on a walk with, mid-walk. I've got to ask, what was it like recording and recording an audiobook? I'm fascinated. How did you find that?
Oh, you mean the process of actually reading your own book?
Yeah.
It's incredible because it goes on for about 2.5 days, depending on how many mistakes you make. And you have to really, really concentrate, and then you have to take lots of throat sweets, and you only get about 15-minute breaks in between the sections. So you might read an entire chapter, and then you get a quick 15-minute break, and you're back sitting there again. So it's very labour-intensive. But it also means it's good for me because my mind could wander, but it didn't, because you have to focus on it, and you mustn't make a mistake, because every time you make a mistake you have to go back to the beginning of the sentence and record it again, and then they edit it all afterwards, so it's nice and smooth. Yeah.
It must have been quite an experience. What inspired the little conversations to go at the start of the chapter?
So I think those conversations were part of my walking process. So each time I walked with somebody, I had a companion, as I say, who had ancestral connections to empire. And so we would spend that walk having lots of conversations about the landscapes around us and what it meant to my walking companions, but also how the history meant something to them and what it meant to them personally. And so I recorded little snippets of our conversations. I couldn't record the whole thing because it went on for hours, because we were walking for hours, but I tried to capture some of the essence of our conversation, which then was sort of fed into the beginning of the audiobook.
You really did cover some ground. I mean, when you said it was the British Isles, you really did go to all corners, didn't you?
I did. I started in Jura, on the Isle of Jura, in Scotland, and then all the way down to Cornwall.
Must be great.
It was amazing. It was one of the best years of my life. I had sun for every walk except the Lake District one, and then it was just slight drizzle, like it is today here.
I was going to say you could have brought it with you today, but never mind. No, it genuinely sounds like a wonderful thing. I mean, again, rambling is so embedded in the British tradition, and it is a wonderful, uplifting pastime. I think it's a great choice of a motif for the book. I'm going to make you choose now, I'm afraid, but is there one of those rambles or one of those people that you're speaking to that sticks with you?
Insect biting me. Okay. One walk that really sticks with me. My favourite walk in my book of walks has got to be the wool walk through Wales, because it's known as the precipice walk, because you really do have a very steep drop to one side of you, but you get the most amazing panoramic view of Wales, and that's near the town of Dolgellau, and the history is all about the wool and the way that wool fabric that was produced in that area was primarily used to clothe enslaved people in the Americas on the plantations. So I think that it was a really lovely walk, and the conversation I had with my walking companion, who was really, taught me how to look at the landscape differently as well, and the colours. She had a very artistic eye. So I think that's got to be my favourite walk.
It was one of the most surprising ones to me, the sort of tangential connection there, if I can call it that, in that it's sort of, this is going to sound like a really hack analogy now, but that was one of the chapters which really drew together the intertwined fabric of colony and empire, even down to clothes being exported from Britain to enslaved people elsewhere or within Britain. It was outstanding. I really, really enjoyed your book. I hate to sound like a suck-up, but it was transformative, and I'm really glad to have spoken to you about it.
Yeah, brilliant.
I think we're coming towards a point now where I do have a couple of formulaic questions that I ask everybody.
Go with the formulaic questions. Yeah.
I'm trying to make a series about conservation and different ways that you can look at conservation. Sorry, I'm feeling spots of rain. I think we're going to be all right.
I think it'll be all right. This tree will protect us for a bit.
Do you have, Corinne, do you have an interesting conservation fact for us? Something we might not know?
I've forgotten this question.
Oh, don't worry.
Well, can I just kind of do a bit of a hack because I'm not a conservationist?
Yeah, definitely.
So, no, all I'd say is that when you get older, you should walk more because it strengthens your muscles and you lose muscle mass as you get older.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's easy to think about walking as being really great for the environment and not taking those short journeys, but it's also good to think about how it also benefits you, your mental health and your physical health.
Absolutely. This space here is a prime example of just feeling better for being outside.
Yeah.
I should have asked really, do you consider yourself much of are you green-fingered, are you a conservationist? Do you worry about the environment?
Oh yeah, I think about nature and I don't drive and I go everywhere on public transport and I walk everywhere I can, and I really, really care about trying not to fly too much or if at all. I get trains all over Europe. And
what at its core motivates that for you? Because obviously that is the right choice.
I think it's concern for
the
environment and not wanting to be hypocritical about embracing nature and killing things on the other. So on the other hand, but I think, if you want an historical conservation fact,
if anything comes to mind, hit me.
Yeah, I think one of the things that fascinated me was that when people went out to the British Empire, they got fascinated by the plant species that they found. And a whole load of very lucrative nurseries sprang up to sell these beautiful and very expensively transported plants that have been grown in these nurseries from seed and so on.
Right.
Sprang up around it, and they were, those plants were bought by often with people with colonial wealth or who'd inherited colonial wealth to then put on in their designed landscapes around their country estates. So I think that would probably be my conservation fact, if that's allowed, because it's not very scientific.
No, I love it. I mean, it's the truth. I wouldn't have even realised that there was a sort of cottage industry of exotic plant nurseries.
It was big business.
Makes perfect sense.
Precursor to the garden centres.
Really?
So our garden centres have a colonial origin. There you are.
See, there you go. There's a hard truth for me to confront. I love nothing more than a Sunday at the garden centre. In fact, I do it pretty much every Sunday. And I, for a slight moment there, was a little bit heartbroken considering a different type of history, but it's important to do that, isn't it? I think you look at the history of the lawn, it's a show of stateliness, isn't it? And I don't have to grow food here. So that's a perfectly legit conservation fact.
All right,
I appreciate it.
We'll go for that one then.
However, speaking of the word perfect, none of us are perfect. I have to ask everybody for your conservation sin.
Conservation sins.
For instance, I just realised this morning that I own 2 of those non-stick Teflon pans at home that are a nightmare, but I can't throw them away, so I probably just have them forever now. I feel bad about that one. Can you share a conservation sin?
Actually, me and probably everyone in this city at the moment. Normally we recycle our recyclables.
Yeah.
But at the moment we've had a bin strike since January, and we have to put all our recyclable items in our general waste, and no recycling has happened in this city since January, and it is absolutely horrible. Squashing up your plastic, your single-use plastic, and putting it back in the bin, knowing it's going to go to landfill. It's heartbreaking.
This city being Birmingham, is it the entirety of Birmingham? Have I got that right?
The entirety of Birmingham. There is a
my
big
Lord.
standoff and nobody's solving it. And meanwhile, we've got this environmental crisis mounting up in the city and we're all participating in it. So that's my conservation sin.
I mean, I feel a lot of sympathy for you for that one. That is not your fault, but at the same time, it must be quite heartbreaking, like me looking at my Teflon pans.
Yeah.
Look, none of us are perfect. It sounds like you're doing a great job with the walking and public transport,
I try,
though.
yeah.
Well done on that one. We do our best. No, Corrine, it's been a fascinating conversation. Really, really appreciate
All right.
it. Thank you ever so much.
You are very welcome. Pleasure.
I'll
Right.
do one of those.
I'll get rid of these
We're really
flies.
pushing our luck, aren't we?
Nasty flies.
Thanks, Corrine. That was one of my favourite interviews that I've ever done. It was fascinating to learn the exact history of balsam, and chatting about colonialisation is something that we could all do a bit more of. If you like it, check out Corrine's book, Our Island Stories, and the rest of her work. Now it's time for me to tell you the YouTube channel of the week. I'm not much of a history buff, I have to confess, but John Greene and CrashCourse do lovely, digestible little chunks of history in 15 minutes or so. There's topics on anything that you can imagine. Go and check it out, it's on YouTube. There's hundreds of things, not just on history, science and all sorts, but the history ones are really digestible and really good. And finally, the playlist for this week. That's called Calendular. Calendula is a bright yellow or orange flower that you can really easily grow in your garden. It's one of those great ones where you just throw the seeds on the ground and it'll pop up. It's an annual plant. I'm tangentially relating it to this week's subject, history, because calendula, can you sort of see where I'm going with that? Anyway, if you search on Spotify for SMTP Calendula, you'll find a track list of kind of gardeny, relaxing songs that talk about the progress of time. So that's it for this week. Thanks for being here again. If you like it, subscribe, tell your friends, do all of that good stuff. We'll be back next week talking to Kelly about how you can transform your local environment. Meanwhile, have a good week.